We think we know our story. We think it goes something like this: humans started as simple hunters, then they invented farming, then they built villages, then cities, then religion and art. A neat, clean line from primitive to us. But what if that line is wrong? What if a single discovery could grab that timeline and snap it in half? That's what's happening right now. All over the world, archaeologists are digging up things that don't fit. It's things that shouldn't exist. They're finding cities older than farming, art from people we thought were brutes, entire civilizations swallowed by jungles, invisible for centuries until now. These aren't just old pots and bones. These are discoveries that force us to ask some very uncomfortable questions. Are we the first advanced civilization on this planet? Were ancient people more sophisticated than we ever imagined? How much of our own history have we completely misunderstood? The ground is giving up its secrets, and they're changing everything. Number 22, did Romans invent takeout? We picture Romans lounging on couches, eating grapes, having extravagant hours-long feasts. That's the image from the movies. It's the story of the rich and powerful. But what did normal people do? The shopkeepers, the builders, the dock workers, they didn't have time for a 2-hour lunch. So what did they eat? In 2019, archaeologists working in Pompeii found the answer. They were excavating a part of the city called Regio V, an area buried so deep in ash from the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD that it was largely untouched by early looters. And there they found it, with Thermopolium. The word means a place where hot food is sold. It was, for all intents and purposes, a Roman fast food joint. This wasn't just a simple counter, it was beautifully preserved. The L-shaped counter was painted with bright frescoes, vivid images of the food on offer. There was a rooster, 2 upside-down ducks ready for cooking. It was a visual menu. The paintings weren't just for decoration, they were advertising. The director of the Pompeii Archaeological Park, Massimo Osanna, called it an extraordinary find. Because this wasn't just an empty shop. Embedded in the counter were deep terracotta jars called dolia. These jars held the hot food, like a modern bain-marie, and inside them, scientists found traces of the food itself. This was the real shock. They found fragments of duck bone, along with remnants of pork, goat, fish, and land snails. It was a Roman version of surf and turf, served to go. They even found that some dishes had been mixed together, a kind of Roman paella. This wasn't the refined food of the elite. This was the hearty, high-energy food of the working class. They also found a dog skeleton, but it wasn't a watchdog. It was a tiny, small dog. It suggests that perhaps the owner, or a customer, had a pet with them. It adds a human touch. This wasn't just a commercial transaction. It was a part of daily life. People came here, maybe with their pets, to grab a quick, hot meal. It tells us that Roman street life was bustling, loud, and smelled of cooking food, much like a busy city street today. They also found wine containers with traces of fava beans. The Romans would add the beans to the wine to change its flavor and color. It's a specific culinary detail that shows a real food culture at work, even for the common person. This discovery, published and discussed widely in archaeological journals in 2020, completely changes our picture of Roman society. It wasn't all formal banquets. It was a society on the move, a society that needed quick, convenient food. They had a complex commercial food system that we are only just beginning to understand. How many of these fast food shops existed across the Roman Empire? Were there ancient chain restaurants? What other secrets about the Roman diet are still buried? And could they show that their common cuisine was far more complex than we assume? Did the lower classes actually eat a more varied diet than the rich, who were bound by culinary traditions? Number 21. Who built Scotland's ancient temples? Before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, something was happening in the north of Scotland. On a narrow strip of land in the Orkney Islands, a huge complex was being built. For a long time, archaeologists knew about some impressive Neolithic sites in Orkney, like the stone circle at Ring of Brodgar and the burial mound of Maeshowe. But they thought they were separate, isolated monuments. Then, in 2003, archaeologists started excavating a strange-looking mound on a peninsula called the Ness of Brodgar. They thought they might find a small burial site. What they found instead has been called one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 21st century. It was a massive temple complex, a place of pilgrimage and ritual that was active for over 1,000 years, from around 3,300 BC to 2,300 BC. This wasn't a small village, it was a coordinated monumental construction project. The site is dominated by huge freestanding buildings with stone walls up to 5 meters thick. These weren't houses. They had no beds, no standard hearths. They were public buildings, cathedrals of the Stone Age. Scale is staggering. The site is surrounded by a massive stone wall, what archaeologists call the Great Wall of Brodgar. It was 4 meters high and 100 meters long, cutting off the peninsula from the rest of the island. It was a statement. It said, "This place is special. This place is separate from the everyday world." The project director, Nick Carter of the University of the Highlands and Islands Archaeology Institute, has said that the complexity and scale of the site are unparalleled for its time. They have found over 30 buildings, and they've only excavated about 10% of the site. They found the first ever painted Neolithic walls in Britain. The stones were decorated with geometric patterns in red, yellow, and black. This was a colorful, vibrant place. This discovery flips the old story on its head. The traditional view was that civilization started in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East and slowly spread out to the primitive fringes like Scotland. But the Ness of Brodgar is older and in some ways more sophisticated than many contemporary sites in the supposed centers of civilization. These were not simple farmers. These were people with a complex belief system, advanced engineering skills, and a society organized enough to build something on this scale over generations. They found finely crafted stone tools, polished stone mace heads used for ceremonial purposes, and thousands of pieces of pottery. This was a center of culture and power. Who were these people? They weren't a known kingdom or empire. They were a Neolithic society that we are only just beginning to identify. The work is ongoing, with each summer's dig revealing more. What was the purpose of this huge complex? Was it a university, a monastery, a seat of power, or something we don't have a word for? Why was it built in this specific remote location in Orkney? And most importantly, why was the entire complex decommissioned around 2300 BC, with the buildings filled with rubble and thousands of animal bones, as if in one final massive feast? Number 20, what was this lost Chinese civilization? For a long time, the story of ancient China was simple. It was centered on one place, the Yellow River Valley. This was considered the cradle of Chinese civilization, the heartland from which all culture and power flowed. Other parts of China were seen as backward, primitive, waiting to be civilized by the Central Kingdom. In 1986, workers at a brick factory in Sichuan province, about 1,200 kilometers southwest of the Yellow River Valley, accidentally stumbled upon something that blew that theory apart. They found a pit filled with jade, elephant tusks, and bizarre, stunning bronze artifacts. This was the Sangsingdui discovery. It revealed a lost civilization, completely unknown to history, that was just as advanced, and in some ways more artistically strange, than the well-known Shang dynasty of the Yellow River. The artifacts were unlike anything seen before. There were huge bronze masks, some over a meter wide, with huge alien-like eyes and protruding pupils. There was a giant bronze statue of a standing man, nearly 3 meters tall, one of the largest bronze figures from that period ever found anywhere in the world. There was a bronze spirit tree decorated with birds and dragons. This was not a primitive backwater. This was a major artistic and religious center. Radiocarbon dating showed the site was from around 1200 BC, contemporary with the Shang dynasty. But its art style was totally different. The Sangsingdui people had a unique vision of the world. The masks don't look like an imitation of anything else. They are original. They are powerful. Who were they made to represent? Gods? Ancestors? Shamans? We have no idea. This civilization left no written records, at least none that we have found. The dig in 1986 revealed 2 pits, then for decades nothing, but in 2019 archaeologists began a new round of excavations. And between 2020 and 2022, they found 6 more pits. These new pits were even more spectacular. They contained over 13,000 new artifacts. There was a bronze box with a jade vessel inside. There were more of the strange masks, but this time some were made of gold. One gold mask weighs over 100 grams. They found silks, something previously thought to be mainly from the Yellow River area. The finds were so significant that the Chinese government is building a new, massive museum just for them. The discovery, reported in journals like Antiquity, forces a total rethink of early Chinese history. It wasn't one single source of civilization. It was a world of multiple interacting and sometimes competing advanced cultures. The Sangsing Kingdom was a major player that was completely written out of history. Who were the Sangsing people and what language did they speak? Why did they create these strange, unique bronze masks? Was their religion completely different from that of the Shang dynasty? And why did their civilization suddenly disappear around 1100 BC after apparently burning and burying their most sacred objects in these pits? Number 19 were the Vikings in America, 500 years before Columbus. We all know the story of Columbus discovering America in 1492, but for decades there have been whispers, sagas, and theories that others got there first. The most persistent were the stories about the Vikings, or Norse. The Icelandic sagas, written down in the 13th century, tell of a land called Vinland, discovered by Leif Erikson around the year 1000. For a long time, most historians thought these were just stories, myths of a Western paradise. Then, in the 1960s, archaeologists Helge and Anstein Ingstad found the remains of a Norse settlement at a place called Lance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. They found the ruins of turf-walled buildings, a forge for working iron, and artifacts that were clearly Norse. This was physical proof. The Vikings had been to North America. But one big question remained: exactly when. The carbon dating of the site gave a wide range, roughly from 700 to 1100 AD. It was hard to be precise. A breakthrough came in 2021. A study published in the journal Nature used a new, incredibly precise dating method. The scientists know that occasionally massive solar storms hit the Earth, leaving a spike of a specific radioactive isotope, carbon-14, in the atmosphere. This spike gets absorbed by trees, creating a distinct marker in their tree rings for that specific year. One such solar storm is known to have occurred in the year 992 AD. A team led by geoscientist Michael D. from the University of Groningen looked at pieces of wood found at the Lance Ox Meadows site. Like, these weren't just random bits of wood, they were wood chips left by the Norse, cut with their metal axes. The local indigenous people at the time did not use metal tools, so these cuts were a definitive sign of Norse activity. The scientists found 3 different pieces of wood from 3 different trees. They all showed the carbon-14 spike from the 992 AD solar storm. By counting the rings from that spike to the final ring just under the bark where the axe fell, they could pinpoint the exact year the trees were cut down. The answer was 1021 AD, not around the year 1000, but exactly 1021 AD. This is the first time we have an exact confirmed date for Europeans in the Americas. It was 471 years before Columbus set sail. The study provides a solid, scientific anchor point for the Norse presence. It confirms the sagas were not just myths, but oral histories based on real events. The settlement at Lance Ox Meadows may have been a base camp for further exploration, a place to repair ships and gather resources before heading home or exploring further south. How long did the Norse stay in Vinland? Was Lance Ox Meadows their only settlement, or are there others still waiting to be found? How far south did they explore, and what was the nature of their interaction with the indigenous people who they called Skraelings? Was it peaceful trade or violent conflict that drove them away? Number 18. What is the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients? The Amazon rainforest is often seen as a pristine wilderness, a place largely untouched by human hands until modern times. The idea was that the soil was too poor and the environment too harsh to support large, complex societies. Small, nomadic tribes, yes, but cities and large-scale agriculture, impossible. This idea is being completely overturned, largely thanks to new technology and some incredibly daring explorers. In 2017, a team of Colombian and British archaeologists, funded by the European Research Council, were exploring a remote area of the Colombian Amazon. They were looking for signs of early human settlement. What they found was so vast and so spectacular, they nicknamed it the Sistine Chapel of the Ancients. The discovery was kept secret for a few years to protect the site, and was revealed in a documentary series called Jungle Mystery: Lost Kingdoms of the Amazon in 2020. The project leader was Jose Iriarte, an archaeologist at Exeter University. On a series of sheer rock cliffs in the Serranía de la Mendoza, they found an 8-mile-long wall of paintings. Tens of thousands of them. The paintings are incredibly detailed, painted in red ochre. They depict a lost world. There are giant sloths, mastodons, camelids, and Ice Age horses. These were the megafauna that went extinct around the end of the last Ice Age. This means the paintings must be at least 12,500 years old. They also show humans hunting these giant animals. There are handprints, geometric shapes and scenes of daily life. There are people dancing, people in masks, people interacting with animals. It's an entire world painted on rock. The sheer scale of it is hard to comprehend. It's one of the largest collections of rock art in the world, and it was made by some of the very first people to arrive in the Amazon. These were not primitive survivors struggling in a hostile jungle. They were artists. They were storytellers. They had a rich spiritual and cultural life. The paintings are so high up on the cliffs in some places that the archaeologists believe the artists must have built huge wooden towers or ladders to reach them. This implies a community working together on a major project. The discovery proves that the Amazon was settled far earlier than previously thought, and that these early inhabitants had a deep connection to the animals and the world around them. It's a snapshot of the world at the very end of the last ice age, painted by the people who lived through it. What do all the geometric symbols in the paintings mean? Was this a sacred site, a history book, or an astronomical calendar? How did they create pigments that have lasted for over 12,000 years in such a harsh climate? And are there other, even older, sites like this hidden deep within the unexplored parts of the Amazon? Number 17. Did Neanderthals have art and souls? The classic image of the Neanderthal is a hunched, brutish, club-wielding caveman. They were our evolutionary cousins, but we Homo sapiens were the smart ones. We had art, we had language, we had symbolic thought. They were just a dead end, an inferior model that couldn't compete. This view has dominated for over a century, and it is almost certainly wrong. A series of discoveries in Spain have completely shaken up this old prejudice. In 2018, a study in the journal Science dropped a bombshell. A team of researchers led by Dirk Hoffman of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology used a new dating technique called uranium thorium, dating on cave paintings in 3 different Spanish caves, La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales. This technique dates the thin layer of calcite mineral that forms on top of the paintings over time. It's much more accurate than carbon dating. The paint itself, which can be contaminated. The results were shocking. The paintings, which include red lines forming a ladder-like shape, stencils of human hands, and painted stalactites, were dated to at least 64,800 years ago. This date is hugely significant. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, are not thought to have arrived in Spain until about 40,000 years ago. This means the paintings were made by Neanderthals. It wasn't just a random smudge. The ladder-like symbol is a clear abstract design. The hand stencils show a sense of self, of leaving a mark. This is symbolic behavior. This is art. It proves that Neanderthals were not mindless brutes. They had the cognitive capacity to think in abstracts, to create symbols, and to represent their world. It is the oldest known cave art in the world. Another discovery supports this. In the Cueva de los Aviones in southeastern Spain, archaeologists found perforated seashells and lumps of pigment. The shells had been painted with red and yellow pigments, and were likely worn as necklaces or pendants. They were dated to 115,000 years ago. This is long before any contact with modern humans. This is personal adornment. It's about identity. It's about beauty. Neanderthals were decorating themselves. More recently, in 2020, research in the Cueva de Ardales showed that Neanderthals repeatedly entered the cave over thousands of years to paint the stalactite formations, suggesting a long-term tradition, a ritual behavior. This wasn't a one-off event, it was part of their culture. These discoveries mean that the human revolution of art and symbolism didn't start with us. It started with our cousins. If Neanderthals had art and symbolism, did they also have complex language? What did these symbols mean to them? Did their spiritual world have gods, spirits, or a concept of an afterlife? And if they were so much like us, why did they disappear? Was it climate change, competition with us, or did we simply absorb them into our own gene pool? Number 16, who were the real sea peoples? Around 1200 BC, the world fell apart. The great Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittite Empire in Turkey, the Egyptian New Kingdom, and all collapsed, or were severely weakened in a very short period of time. Ancient cities were burned to the ground. Trade routes vanished. Writing was lost in some areas. It was a dark age. Egyptian records from the time blame the collapse on a mysterious confederation of invaders they called the Sea Peopleses. The identity of the Sea Peoples has been one of the biggest mysteries in archaeology for over a century. Who were they? Where did they come from? The Egyptian inscriptions give us some names: the Pelasite, the Checker, the Sheridan, the Luca, but we couldn't connect them to any known people or place. They were ghosts. They came from the sea, they destroyed everything, and they vanished. Recent archaeological work is finally starting to give these ghosts an identity. A key piece of the puzzle came from a site in Turkey called Usakli Hoyuk. In 2019, an Italian archaeological mission led by Anacleto de Agostino found evidence of a massive fire that destroyed the Hittite city there around 1200 BC. But after the fire, a new, completely different type of pottery appeared. It was handmade, crude, and looked very similar to pottery found in southeastern Europe and the Balkans from the same period. This suggests that the invaders who burned the city might have come from that region. Another huge clue comes from genetics. A 2019 study published in Science Advances analyzed the DNA from skeletons buried in the ancient port city of Ashkelon in Israel. Ashkelon later became one of the main cities of the Philistines. The Bible describes the Philistines as coming from a foreign land. The Egyptian records identify the Peliset as one of the Sea Peoples, and most scholars believe the Peliset and the Philistines are the same people. The DNA results were stunning. The earliest Philistine burials from the 12th century BC showed a significant amount of European ancestry. This genetic signal wasn't present in the local population before they arrived. The closest match was with people from southern Europe, particularly the Aegean, Sardinia, and Iberia. This is direct genetic proof of a migration event from the west into the Levant, right at the time of the Bronze Age collapse. The Sea Peoples were, at least in part, Europeans. They were not just raiders. They were migrants, settlers, looking for a new home. What caused this mass migration in the first place? Was it famine, drought, political upheaval, or something else? Were all the different groups of sea peoples part of a coordinated alliance, or was it just a chaotic wave of separate groups moving at the same time? And how much of their culture, from language to religion, did they bring with them to their new homes in the Levant? Number 15, was there a lost city in a South African forest? The history of southern Africa is often told as a story of emptiness. The narrative, pushed by colonial settlers, was that before Europeans arrived, the land was largely unpopulated, roamed by a few scattered tribes. The idea of large, organized cities was dismissed. A researcher from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg named Karim Sadr was not convinced. He had spent years studying the distribution of stone-walled ruins that dot the landscape south of the city. But traditional archaeology involved walking through the bush, a slow and difficult process. Sadr decided to try something new. He turned to LiDAR, a remote sensing technology that uses laser pulses to map the ground from an airplane. It can see through trees and vegetation to reveal the contours of the ground underneath. In 2018, Sadr and his team began using LiDAR to scan the area around Johannesburg. The results, which are still being fully analyzed and published, were incredible. Hidden beneath the trees was a vast, sprawling city, a city that no one knew existed. He called it Kweneng. The LiDAR scans revealed hundreds of houses and large structures, all linked by roads and enclosed by stone walls. The city is estimated to have been home to at least 10,000 people. It wasn't a temporary camp. It was a permanent, organized urban center. Based on the style of the structures, the city is believed to have been at its peak between the 15th and 19th centuries. This was a thriving Swana-speaking community. The city layout shows clear signs of social organization. There were central cattle enclosures, a sign of wealth and power, surrounded by smaller household units. There were public spaces and main thoroughfares. This discovery completely demolishes the empty land myth. Kweneng was a major political and economic hub long before colonial settlers arrived in the region. The city likely declined in the early 19th century due to civil wars and conflicts known as the Mfecane, which destabilized the entire region before the arrival of the first white settlers. So, when the settlers arrived, they found a depopulated landscape and assumed it had always been that way. They didn't realize they were walking on the ruins of a recently collapsed civilization. The LiDAR technology is a game changer for African archaeology. It is revealing a past that was deliberately ignored and forgotten. The project shows that southern Africa had a rich history of urbanism and complex societies. How large was Kweneng's territory and influence? What other lost cities are still hidden under the vegetation of southern Africa? What was their economy based on, beyond cattle? And what can the layout of Kweneng tell us about the political and social structure of the Swana kingdoms before the colonial era? Number 14, what happened at this Bronze Age Pompeii? Sometimes, a disaster can be a gift to archaeology. When a place is destroyed suddenly and abandoned, it freezes a moment in time. That's what happened at Pompeii, and that's what happened at a site in England called Must Farm. In 2015 to 2016, a team from the Cambridge Archaeological Unit began excavating a site in a quarry in Cambridgeshire. They knew there were some Bronze Age remains there. They had no idea what they were about to find. About 3,000 years ago, around 850 BC, a small settlement of circular wooden houses was built on stilts over a river. It was a cozy, well-provisioned community. Then, one day, it caught fire. The fire spread rapidly and the stilts burned through. The houses and everything in them collapsed into the muddy river below. The mud and silt extinguished the flames and preserved the contents in stunning detail. Archaeologists have called it the British Pompeii, or the Bronze Age Pompeii. You know, the level of preservation is unlike anything ever found in Britain from this period. The site director Mark Knight described the find as a time capsule. They found pots with the food still inside. One pot had the spoon still sticking out of the meal of nettle stew. They found complete sets of pottery, including tiny cups and large storage jars. They found textiles, some of the finest and best preserved from Bronze Age Europe, made from plant fibers. They found exotic glass beads that came from the Middle East, showing that this small riverside community was part of a long-distance trade network. They found wooden bowls, buckets, tools with their wooden handles still attached, and weapons. They even found a human skull, showing that not everyone escaped the fire. The houses themselves were perfectly preserved in the mud. You can see the tool marks on the timbers. You can see how they were constructed. It's a blueprint for a Bronze Age house. The finds, detailed in reports from the Cambridge Archaeological Unit and Historic England, give us an unprecedented look at the daily life of a Bronze Age family. This wasn't a king's palace or a great temple. This was a normal home. We can see what they ate, what they wore, what tools they used, what caused the fire. Was it an accident, or was the settlement attacked? Why was the settlement built on stilts over the water in the first place? Was it for defense, for fishing, or for some other reason? And how common were these stillhouse settlements? Was this a typical way of life or something unique to this community? Number 13, what was this lost? Golden City of the Pharaohs. The history of ancient Egypt seems so well known. We know the pharaohs, the pyramids, the great temples of Luxor and Karnak. It feels like there can't be many big secrets left. But in September 2020, a team of Egyptian archaeologists led by the famous Zahi Hawass was searching for a mortuary temple on the west bank of the Nile at Luxor. They started digging, and they hit something unexpected. Mud brick walls that went on in every direction. They hadn't found a temple, they had found an entire city. The city was quickly identified as Aten, or the Dazzling Aten. It was founded by one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, Amenhotep III, the grandfather of Tutankhamun. He ruled from 1391 to 1353 BC, a time when the Egyptian Empire was at its absolute peak of wealth and power. This was the largest ancient city ever uncovered in Egypt. Famed Egyptologist Betsy Bryan of Johns Hopkins University called the discovery the most important since the tomb of Tutankhamun. The city was incredibly well preserved. It was as if the inhabitants had just walked away yesterday. The walls of the houses were up to 3 meters high. They found entire neighborhoods. There was an administrative district, a residential area, and an industrial section. They found a bakery, complete with ovens and pottery for storing food. They found workshops for making bricks, jewelry, and amulets. The finds give us a detailed look at life in the New Kingdom. They found tools, rings, scarabs, colored pottery vessels, and spinning and weaving implements. They found a burial of a person with their arms outstretched to the side and a rope wrapped around their knees, a very unusual burial. They found a large cemetery and a number of rock-cut tombs. The city was active during the reigns of Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten. Akhenaten famously abandoned the traditional Egyptian gods and moved his capital to a new city, Amarna. It seems that Aten was then abandoned, and because it was on the west bank, away from the main city of Thebes, it was simply covered by sand and forgotten for 3,000 years. This is not a city of tombs and temples. This is a city of life, a snapshot of the industrial and administrative backbone of the Egyptian empire at its height. Why was the city abandoned so suddenly? Did everyone simply follow Akhenaten to his new capital? Or was there another reason? What secrets do the unexcavated parts of the city hold? Could the tombs reveal new information about the powerful officials who ran the empire for Amenhotep III? And could this city help us understand the mysterious religious revolution of Akhenaten? Number 12. How did a tiny-brained human relative bury its dead? The story of human evolution used to be a straight line, a steady progression from ape-like ancestors to us, with brains getting bigger and bigger along the way. But the discovery of a new species of human relative, deep in a cave in South Africa, has made that story much more complicated and weird. In 2013, recreational cavers exploring the Rising Star cave system near Johannesburg squeezed through a tiny 18-centimeter wide crack and dropped into a hidden chamber. The floor was covered in bones. They weren't animal bones, they were human-like. Paleoanthropologist Lee Berger from the University of the Witwatersrand was alerted, and he put together a team of underground astronauts, small female scientists, who could fit through the narrow passages. What they found was one of the most significant fossil discoveries ever made. Over 1,500 fossils, representing at least 15 individuals of a previously unknown species. Berger and his team named it Homo naledi. The discovery was announced in 2015. Homo naledi was a strange mix of old and new. It had ape-like shoulders for climbing and curved fingers. But its feet and long legs were very human, like built for walking upright. The biggest shock was its brain. It was tiny, about the size of an orange, around 500 cubic centimeters. That's less than half the size of a modern human brain. Based on its primitive features, you would expect it to be very old, maybe 2 or 3 million years old. But when they finally managed to date the fossils, the result was another bombshell. They were young, incredibly young, between 236,000 and 335,000 years old. This was published in the journal eLife in 2017. This means that while our own big-brained ancestors, Homo sapiens, were evolving in Africa, this small-brained, primitive-looking relative was living alongside them. But the biggest mystery was how the bones got into the chamber. The chamber, named the Dinaledi Chamber, is almost impossible to get to. There is no other entrance. The bones weren't washed in. There are no signs of predators dragging them in. There are no tool marks on the bones to suggest cannibalism. The individuals range from infants to old adults. The only explanation that seems to fit, according to Berger and his team, is that Homo naledi was deliberately placing its dead in this deep, dark, remote chamber. This is revolutionary. It implies ritual, it implies a sense of loss, and a need to dispose of the dead in a special way. It implies a complex behavior that we thought was unique to big-brained species like us or the Neanderthals. How could a creature with a brain the size of a chimpanzee's have such a sophisticated symbolic behavior? The discovery challenges the very idea that brain size equals intelligence or cultural complexity. Was this really a burial ritual, or is there another explanation for how the bones got into the cave that we haven't thought of? Did Homo naledi use fire to light their way through the dark passages? And did they ever interact with our own species, Homo sapiens? Could some of the myths of small strange people in southern Africa be a distant folk memory of them? Number 11, who lived in these massive Amazonian cities? The idea that the Amazon was a pristine wilderness is dying hard, but discovery after discovery is replacing it with a new picture, a picture of a heavily managed, densely populated landscape with large towns and cities. The Sistine Chapel discovery showed the deep artistic past. Other discoveries are showing the urban present. Again, LiDAR is the key. For decades, archaeologists have known about strange earthworks in parts of the Amazon, mounds and ditches that hinted at something more. But the jungle was too thick to see the full picture. Starting in the 2010s, researchers began flying planes with LiDAR equipment over these areas. In 2018, a study in Nature Communications detailed the results of LiDAR scans in the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia. A team led by Heiko Prumers of the German Archaeological Institute revealed a network of settlements from the Kasarabi culture who lived in the area from about 500 to 1400 AD. This wasn't just a few villages, it was a low-density urban landscape. There were 2 very large sites, Kotoka and Landavar, that were central hubs. These sites had civic ceremonial architecture, U-shaped mounds, rectangular platform mounds, and conical pyramids up to 22 meters high. These large centers were connected to smaller sites by a vast network of straight causeways and canals that stretched for kilometers through the landscape. It was a planned, engineered environment. They were managing the landscape, controlling water for farming and transport. Another, even more recent discovery took this further. In 2022, a study in Nature revealed an even more extensive network of lost cities in the Upano Valley of eastern Ecuador, on the eastern flank of the Andes. A team led by Steven Rostain had been excavating in the area for years, but LIDAR revealed the true scale. They found a dense network of more than 6,000 earthen platforms, plaza structures, and mounds, all connected by a staggering system of roads. One road was at least 25 kilometers long. The settlements are spread over 300 square kilometers. The culture, known as the Upano people, built this between about 500 BC and 600 AD, making it much older than the Kasarab sites in Bolivia. This is a form of garden urbanism, with houses and plazas interspersed with agricultural fields and drainage systems. This wasn't a jungle, it was a city. A sprawling, green city. It completely upends the idea that people only lived in the Amazon highlands or on the riverbanks. They were living in the deep interior and transforming it on a massive scale. How many people lived in these Amazonian urban landscapes? What kind of political system did they have to organize such massive construction projects? What crops were they farming in their managed landscapes? And why were these large settlements abandoned? Was it warfare, disease, or climate change that brought this Amazonian urbanism to an end? Number 10, was this a real vampire burial? Throughout history, people have been afraid of the dead. Not just of ghosts, but of the idea that the dead could physically rise from the grave to torment the living. The revenant, or the undead, is a fear found in many cultures, and sometimes archaeologists find grim evidence of these fears. In 2018, archaeologists from the University of Arizona and Stanford University were excavating a 5th century AD children's cemetery in Lugnano in Teverina, Italy. This was a time when a devastating malaria epidemic was sweeping through the region. The cemetery, known as La Necropoli dei Bambini, was full of the graves of infants and small children. But one burial was different. It was the skeleton of a 10-year-old child, and the child had a large stone wedged into its mouth. The stone had been placed there intentionally, with force. David Soren, the archaeologist from the University of Arizona who was overseeing the dig, called it a vampire burial. The practice of putting a stone or brick in the mouth of a deceased person is a known, though rare, form of deviant burial. It was a folk practice intended to stop the dead from rising. The belief was that the stone would prevent the body from chewing through its shroud and spreading disease, or from feeding on the living. This specific burial from Lugnano is particularly chilling. The child likely died from malaria, a disease that caused high fevers and suffering. The local community, terrified of the disease and perhaps seeing the child's death as unnatural, took this extreme measure to make sure the child's spirit or body could not return to harm them. The discovery, reported by publications like Archaeology magazine, provides a stark, emotional window into the fear and superstition that gripped communities during ancient epidemics. They were using a mix of early Christian beliefs and older folk magic to try and control a world that seemed to be falling apart. It's a poignant reminder that people in the past were not just historical figures, they were people who felt fear and love and desperation. How common were these deviant burials across Europe? What other methods did people use to prevent the dead from rising? Was this practice linked specifically to deaths from disease, or was it used for anyone considered a social outcast? And how did these folk beliefs interact with the official doctrines of the rising Christian church at the time? Number 9, when did the first humans really reach America? The story of how people first came to the Americas has been a battleground for archaeologists for decades. The standard theory, known as the Clovis first model, was that the first Americans were big game hunters who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia around 13,500 years ago. They used distinctive stone spear points called Clovis points. For a long time, any evidence of people being in the Americas before this date was dismissed as controversial or unreliable. That picture is now completely shattered, and one of the most powerful pieces of evidence comes from a place you might not expect, White Sands National Park in New Mexico. In 2009, a park manager noticed strange tracks preserved in the dried-up lake beds. Archaeologists began to investigate. They weren't animal tracks, they were human footprints. Thousands of them, perfectly preserved in the gypsum soil. They found tracks of adults, teenagers, and children. They found tracks of a person carrying a child, their footprints deepening in the mud. They found tracks of people following a giant sloth, perhaps hunting it, it was an incredible snapshot of life during the Ice Age. The big question was, how old were they? The team, led by researchers from the U.S. Geological Survey and Bournemouth University, found a way to date them precisely. The human footprints were found in layers of sediment that also contained the seeds of an ancient aquatic grass called ditch grass. Because the seeds are organic material, they could be radiocarbon dated. The results, published in the journal Science in 2021, were stunning. The footprints dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. This is not just a little bit before Clovis. This is a full 10,000 years earlier. It means that people were living in North America during the last glacial maximum, the absolute peak of the last ice age, when massive ice sheets covered much of the continent. This changes everything. It means the first Americans could not have come down the famous ice-free corridor between the Great Glaciers because that corridor wasn't open yet. They must have come another way, most likely down the Pacific coast, perhaps using boats. It also means that humans were in the Americas for a much, much longer time than we thought. They weren't just a handful of hunters who arrived and quickly spread. They were established populations living and thriving for millennia. The White Sands footprints are undeniable. You can't argue with a footprint. It's a direct record of a person at a specific moment in time. Who were these early people? What was their culture like? If they came down the coast, where are the archaeological sites that prove it? Are they now underwater due to sea level rise? And how did their presence for an extra, 10,000 years affect the megafauna of the Americas? Were humans a factor in the extinction of mammoths and giant sloths for much longer than we ever imagined? Number 8. What lies beneath the waters of the Nile Delta? We think of Egypt as a land of sand and desert, but thousands of years ago, the coastline was different. The Nile Delta was a shifting, watery landscape, and some of its greatest cities are no longer on land. For centuries, ancient texts spoke of two legendary cities, Thonis Heracleion and Canopus. They were the gateways to Egypt, bustling port cities where Greek traders met Egyptian pharaohs, but for over 2,000 years they were lost. Most scholars thought the stories were just myths or that the cities had been completely destroyed. In the late 1990s, a French underwater archaeologist named Franck Gaudiot decided to search for them. He used advanced survey techniques like side scan, sonar, and nuclear magnetic resonance magnetometers to map the seabed in Aboukir Bay near Alexandria. In 2000, he made the discovery of a lifetime. He found them. Thonis Heracleion and Canopus were real. They hadn't been destroyed. They had sunk beneath the waves, perfectly preserved in the silt and sand. And they were likely submerged by a combination of earthquakes, tsunamis, and soil liquefaction sometime around the 8th century AD. The ongoing excavations led by Gaudiot's European Institute for Underwater Archaeology IASM have revealed a stunning world. They have found the remains of massive temples, including the great temple of Amun-Gareb, the supreme god of the city. They have lifted colossal statues of pharaohs, queens, and gods from the seabed. They have found over 700 ancient anchors and 60 shipwrecks, a testament to the city's role as a major maritime hub. They have found gold coins, jewelry, and imported Greek ceramics. The finds show a fascinating blend of Egyptian and Greek culture. The city was known as Thonis to the Egyptians and Heracleion to the Greeks. It was here that the two worlds met. The discoveries have confirmed the accuracy of ancient historians like Herodotus, who described the city's great temple. They found a stone stele, written in hieroglyphics and Greek, that lays out the taxes to be paid by Greek ships trading in the port. It's a piece of ancient bureaucracy frozen in time. The exploration is incredibly difficult. The water is murky, and the artifacts are buried under meters of sediment. But each new discovery adds to the picture of this lost cosmopolitan world. What other structures and neighborhoods of Thonis Heracleion are still waiting to be found under the mud? Can the shipwrecks tell us more about the trade routes and shipbuilding techniques of the time? What was daily life like for the ordinary Greek and Egyptian inhabitants of the city? And are there other lost cities from the ancient world still waiting to be found beneath the sea? Number 7, how old is the oldest human art? When we think of the first art, we usually think of the beautiful cave paintings of horses and bison from places like Lascaux in France, made around 17,000 years ago. But what if the very first artistic impulse was much older and much simpler? What if it was just a doodle? On the Indonesian island of Java, there is a famous site called Trinil. It's where, in the 1890s, the Dutch paleoanthropologist Eugene Dubois discovered the first fossils of Homo erectus. an early human ancestor who lived between about 2 million and 100,000 years ago. For over a century, archaeologists collected fossils from the site, including hundreds of freshwater mussel shells. These shells were excavated by Dubois' team and then stored at a museum in the Netherlands. They were just considered part of the background fauna. In 2007, a PhD student named Josephine Jordans was re-examining this collection of shells. She noticed something strange on one of them. It had a geometric pattern, a series of zigzag lines carved into its surface. It was clearly deliberate. It wasn't a natural mark or the result of an animal scratching the shell. It was an engraving, an intentional design. The question was, how old was it? The team, including Jordans and Will Robrooks from Leiden University, dated the sediment layer where the shell was found. The results, published in Nature in 2014, were astonishing. The shell was between 430,000 and 540,000 years old. This makes the simple zigzag pattern the oldest known geometric engraving in the world, and it was made by Homo erectus. This is a profound discovery. Homo erectus had a brain smaller than ours, and they were long considered to be a simple toolmaker focused only on survival. But this engraving suggests something more. It suggests they had the capacity for abstract thought. The zigzag doesn't represent anything. It's a pattern. It's an aesthetic creation. It required fine motor control and the ability to plan and execute a design. It pushes back the origins of what we might call art or symbolic behavior by hundreds of thousands of years. It also suggests that this cognitive ability wasn't unique to our own lineage. Homo sapiens, meaning it was a shared trait among different human species. The simple act of scratching a pattern on a shell 500,000 years ago is one of the most important clues we have to the origins of the human mind. Was this engraving a one-off doodle, or was it part of a wider artistic tradition for Homo erectus that we just haven't found yet? What was the purpose of the engraving? Was it for decoration, communication, or something else? Could Homo erectus have had other forms of art, using perishable materials like wood or body paint that have been lost to time? Number 6, were there giants in ancient England? Ancient myths are full of stories of giants. In Britain, the story of Stonehenge was often linked to giants or to the wizard Merlin magically transporting the stones. Of course, we know these are just stories, but a recent discovery has revealed a group of people in ancient Britain who were, in a very real sense, different. During the construction of a new railway line, HS2, archaeologists have been conducting one of the largest archaeological projects ever undertaken in the UK. In 2021, near the town of Wendover, they excavated a huge Roman cemetery with about 425 burials. Most were typical Roman burials, but one caught their attention. It was the skeleton of a man who had been decapitated. His head had been placed between his legs. This was a known, if uncommon, Roman burial practice. But what was strange was the man's size. He was estimated to be 6 feet 2 inches tall. In the Roman period, the average man was only about 5 feet 5 inches. This man would have been a giant. He would have towered over everyone he met. Was he just a genetic outlier? Perhaps. But other evidence suggests something more might be going on. Skeletal analysis from a late Roman cemetery in Yorkshire, published by researchers at the University of Cambridge, has shown a surprising number of very tall individuals, many of whom had signs of physical trauma, suggesting they were warriors. Some theories connect these large individuals to Roman military units recruited from barbarian tribes like the Gauls or Germans, who were known to be taller than the average Roman. They may have been elite soldiers or gladiators. The man from Wendover could have been a soldier, a slave, or a gladiator whose life ended far from home. His decapitation might have been a ritual act or simply the result of an execution. The discovery part of the ongoing HS2 archaeology reports reminds us that the Roman Empire was a melting pot of different peoples. A tall man from Germany or Eastern Europe would have seemed like a giant in a small Romano-British town. These are the real people behind the myths. Who was this specific tall man buried at Wendover? Where did he come from? How were tall individuals like him treated in Roman society? Were they feared, respected, or exploited? And could the presence of these unusually large people in Roman Britain have been the origin of some of the later British myths about giants? Number 5, what was the first beer in history? Beer is one of the oldest and most popular drinks in the world. For a long time, archaeologists believed that beer was a happy accident, a byproduct of agriculture. The theory was that people started growing grain to make bread, and then someone accidentally left some wet grain out, it fermented, and they discovered beer. So, farming came first, then beer. A discovery at a site called Rockefet Cave in Israel has turned this idea completely on its head. The cave was used for burials by the Natufian culture, a group of hunter-gatherers who lived in the region between about 15,000 and 11,500 years ago. They were a transitional culture living right before the invention of agriculture. In 2018, a team from Stanford University and the University of Haifa were analyzing residue found in stone mortars carved into the floor of the cave. They were expecting to find traces of food prepared for funeral feasts. What they found, according to a study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports, was evidence of beer brewing. They used sophisticated analysis to look at the microscopic remains of starches and plant particles called phytoliths. The damage they saw to the starch granules was consistent with the process of brewing. There were signs of malting, sprouting the grain, mashing, heating it with water, and fermentation. And the date was the real shocker. The brewing activity was dated to about 13,000 years ago. This is thousands of years before the first evidence of grain cultivation in the region. This means that these hunter-gatherers were making beer before they were farming. They were gathering wild wheat and barley specifically to brew. The beer was likely a thick, porridge-like mash, not the filtered drink we have today. And it was probably made for ritual purposes for the funeral feasts held at the cave. This suggests that the desire to make beer might have been one of the driving forces behind the invention of agriculture. Maybe people didn't start farming to make bread, maybe they started farming to make sure they had a reliable supply of grain for brewing. It reframes the entire Neolithic revolution. It wasn't about a sober search for calories. It might have been about the desire for alcohol, for ritual, for social connection. It puts the party before the plow. How widespread was beer brewing among pre-agricultural societies? Did the desire for other intoxicants also play a role in the development of agriculture in other parts of the world? What was the social and religious significance of this early beer, and how did it taste? Number 4, who were the Denisovans, our third cousin? For a long time, the story of recent human evolution was a simple duet. There was us, Homo sapiens, and there were the Neanderthals. We lived in Europe and Asia, we met, we interbred a little, and then they died out. But in 2010, a third voice joined the choir, a mysterious new character in the human story. Scientists were examining a tiny fragment of a finger bone and a couple of molars found in a place called Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The fossils didn't look particularly special. The cave had been used by both Neanderthals and modern humans. They expected the DNA to match one of them. A team at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, led by the geneticist Svante Paabo, who would later win a Nobel Prize for his work on ancient DNA, sequenced the genome from the finger bone. The results published in Nature were a complete shock. The DNA didn't match Neanderthals, and it didn't match modern humans. It was something new, a completely separate branch of the human family tree. They were named the Denisovans after the cave where they were found. Since then, our knowledge of the Denisovans has grown, but it's been pieced together from scraps. For years, all we had were the few fossils from that one cave in Siberia. We knew from their DNA that they were more closely related to Neanderthals than to us. We also knew that they had interbred with the ancestors of modern humans living in Asia, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. In fact, some populations in Melanesia and among Australian Aboriginals have up to 5% Denisovan DNA, but we had no idea what they looked like. Then, in 2019, a major breakthrough. A jawbone found by a Buddhist monk in a cave on the Tibetan Plateau in 1980 was finally analyzed. Those scientists extracted proteins from the teeth and found they matched the Denisovan genetic profile. The jawbone was dated to 160,000 years ago. This was the first Denisovan fossil found outside of Denisova Cave. It showed they were not just a small, isolated group in Siberia. They were widespread across Asia. And it gave us our first real look at a Denisovan. The jaw was robust, with very large molars. It also explained a genetic mystery. Modern Tibetans have a special gene that helps them survive in high-altitude, low-oxygen environments. It turns out they inherited this gene from the Denisovans, who were clearly adapted to life on the roof of the world long before modern humans arrived. The Denisovans are a ghost species that we are only just beginning to see. What did the Denisovans really look like? How widespread was their population across Asia? What kind of tools and culture did they have? And what other genetic traits did we inherit from them that might be helping us survive today? Number 3, was this Greek computer even more advanced than we knew? In 1901, divers exploring an ancient Roman shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera found a strange, corroded lump of bronze. It sat in a museum for decades, dismissed as a curiosity. Then, in the 1970s, X-rays revealed it was full of gears. It was some kind of complex machine. It became known as the Antikythera mechanism. A notable calculator used to predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, and to track eclipses. It was dated to the 2nd century BC. The complexity was mind-boggling. Nothing even close to it would be made again for over 1,000 years. But we still didn't know exactly how it worked or what it was for. The device was in fragments, and many of its inscriptions were unreadable. In recent years, a massive international research project, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, has used the most advanced technology to unlock its secrets. They use 3D X-ray scanning and advanced imaging techniques to read the faint inscriptions hidden inside the corroded fragments. In 2021, a team from University College London published a new model of the device in the journal Scientific Reports. They believe they have finally figured out the gearing system for the cosmos as the ancient Greeks knew it. They showed how the machine could accurately model the variable motion of the moon and the complex movements of the planets. The Greeks believed the Earth was the center of the universe, so they had to come up with very complex mathematical models using cycles and epicycles to explain the strange retrograde motions of planets like Mars and Jupiter. The UCL team showed how the Antikythera mechanism could have modeled these complex theories in mechanical form. The front of the device was a model of the cosmos. It was a mechanical philosopher's guide to the universe. The new research also deciphered more of the inscriptions. The manual for the device was basically written on the device itself. The inscriptions describe the movements of the planets and the cycles of the sun and moon. The complexity suggests it was built on the theories of the great mathematician Parmenides. The level of miniaturization and the genius of the gear trains are unlike anything we thought the ancient world was capable of. It wasn't just a calendar. It was a mechanical computer that modeled the entire known universe. Who actually built the mechanism? Was it a one-of-a-kind masterpiece, or were there others like it that are now lost? What tools did they use to create such precise miniature gears? And what other incredible technologies from the ancient world have been lost to the sea or the sand? Number 2. Did the Maya build a superhighway network? The great Maya cities of Mexico and Central America are famous for their towering pyramids and palaces. But for a long time, we thought of them as isolated city-states, separated by vast, impenetrable jungle. How did they move people, goods, and armies between these cities? The answer was hidden under the trees. The Maya built a remarkable system of roads, or causeways, called Sakbiob, the plural of Sakbe. They were raised stone causeways, paved with white limestone stucco that would have glowed in the moonlight. We've known about some of them for a long time, especially the ones connecting major buildings within a single city. But we had no idea of the true scale of the network. A new study published in 2020 in the Journal of Archaeological Science used LiDAR to map a huge area of the northern Yucatan Peninsula. A team of researchers, led by Takeshi Inamata from the University of Arizona, scanned the area around the ancient cities of Calakmul and Mirador. The results were breathtaking. The LiDAR revealed a dense, interconnected network of cities, towns, and villages, all linked by a web of hundreds of kilometers of Sakbiob. It was a prehistoric superhighway system. One causeway runs for over 100 kilometers, connecting the cities of Koba and Yaksuna. The LiDAR showed that these weren't just simple paths. They were major engineering projects raised above the swampy ground, running straight as an arrow through the landscape. This discovery changes our understanding of Maya civilization. They weren't isolated kingdoms. They were part of a highly integrated regional state. This road network would have been used for trade, for communication, and for moving armies. It implies a level of centralized planning and political power far greater than previously thought. The Mirador Basin in Guatemala, another area scanned by LiDAR, showed an even denser network, a web of causeways connecting dozens of sites. The Maya were not living in the jungle, they were shaping it, managing it, and building a civilization on an epic scale. The LiDAR is revealing a Mayan world that was more like a sprawling, low-density city than a collection of separate towns. This wasn't a world of scattered settlements, it was a contiguous, connected kingdom. How much of the Maya world was connected by these causeway networks? Who built them? And how did they organize the massive amount of labor required? Were they used primarily for economic, military, or religious purposes? And are there even larger networks still waiting to be discovered under the jungle canopy? Number one, did religion come before civilization? The story we have always told ourselves about human progress is that it started with a practical need. First, we invented agriculture. This allowed us to settle down in one place and produce a surplus of food. This surplus allowed some people to become specialists, priests, builders, artists. This led to villages, then cities, then complex religion and monumental architecture. The order was clear farming first, then temples. A remote hilltop in southeastern Turkey has proven this story is completely wrong. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. In the 1960s, it was dismissed as a medieval cemetery. But in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt took another look. He saw that the strange rectangular stones sticking out of the ground were not gravestones. They were the tops of huge T-shaped pillars. He began to dig. What he and his team uncovered has been called the most important archaeological site in the world. It is a temple, or rather a series of stone temples. There are massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circles. The pillars are covered in intricate carvings of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures. The artistry is stunning. The truly shocking thing about Göbekli Tepe is its age. Using radiocarbon dating, Schmidt and his team determined that it was built around 9,600 BC. That is 11,600 years ago. This makes it 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 7,000 years older than the pyramids. It is the oldest known temple in the world. And here's the part that changes everything: it was built by hunter-gatherers. The people who built Göbekli Tepe did not have agriculture, they did not have pottery, they did not have metal tools, they had not even domesticated animals. They were living in a pre-agricultural Stone Age world. Yet somehow these hunter-gatherers managed to organize themselves to quarry, transport, and erect these massive stone pillars. They were a sophisticated, organized society with a complex, shared belief system. This discovery flips the old model on its head. It suggests that it was the need to come together for ritual that drove people to innovate. The need to build and maintain a sacred site like Göbekli Tepe may have forced people to develop new social structures. It may have been the catalyst for the invention of farming. Perhaps they needed to settle down and cultivate wild grains simply to feed the army of workers required to build the temple. As Klaus Schmidt himself said before he passed away in 2014, first came the temple, then the city. The impulse to worship, to create a sacred space, to tell stories about the cosmos through art, may be the most fundamental human drive of all. It's not a byproduct of civilization, it is the cause of it. What was the purpose of Göbekli Tepe? Was it a temple to the dead, a kind of pilgrimage center, or an astronomical observatory? What do the strange animal carvings and the faceless T-shaped pillars represent? And most importantly, what happened around 8,000 BC when the entire site was deliberately and carefully buried under thousands of tons of earth, as if to hide it from the world forever?